Okay, so chess is a game played between two people, and each person has control of their own armies. As you can see, one player has the white army, and the other player has the black army, and they're basically pitted against each other. And if you look at the chessboard, you can see it's comprised of squares. We have 8 squares going across, as well as 8 squares going up and down. And so we have an 8 by 8 square chessboard, totaling 64 squares. And as you'll also notice, each player starts with 16 pieces in their army. So we have a pawn here. I have a pawn highlighted right here. We have a rook. This guy is the rook. This is a knight. This is a bishop. This is a queen. And this is a king. And as you can see, black's army is the same. He's got one of each of the pieces that white has. And as you can see, black's starting position is a mirror image of white's. So it's fair. Each side has the same number of pieces. And as the game goes on, pieces get captured. So eventually, as you get towards the end of the game, the number of pieces reduces itself. So we go from 16 pieces to each side to maybe 2 or 3 each side. And what you're looking at here is the starting position for every game of chess. Every game of classical chess starts from this position. Not much is going on, as you can see. And the object of the game is to capture the king, or checkmate, as they say. But I'll explain more about that in my next video. Okay, so in chess, each piece is defined by its movements. In other words, each piece moves a different way. And the first piece I'm going to start off with is the king. So the king can move one square in any direction. So white moves and then black moves. Players take turns moving their pieces around the chessboard. One player moves, the other player moves, and captures are included in this. I'll get to capturing in just a moment. But basically you just keep taking turns until one side is checkmated or the game ends in a draw, and that happens when neither king is able to be checkmated. Both kings are safe, and it's a draw. So anyway, a king can move one square in any direction. This is a cool chessboard because what happens is if I click on a piece, it shows all the squares that the piece can move to, as indicated by the little blue circles. So when I click this white king, he can move to any of the 8 squares surrounding him, either adjacent or diagonally. And same with the black king, of course. So the king moves one square in any direction. Pretty straightforward. He's the most important piece in the chess game. So once he's captured, the game is over. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to introduce to you are the rooks. The rook's movement is a little bit more complicated than the king's, but basically a rook can move any number of squares either horizontally or vertically, as you can see here. So I can just move these rooks around. This time I'll move him up, and this guy I'll move over, and then I'll move him over like this. So basically, the rooks move in a giant T. Okay, so now I'm going to move the kings again. King moves, rook moves, rook moves, king moves, rook moves, rook moves. And here we get to a point where I'd like to illustrate an important thing about how the pieces move. So when the rooks move, they cannot go past their own kind of piece. So when I highlight this rook, he can't move past the king, his own king. So in chess, either a square can be empty or occupied by a piece, and no more than one piece can occupy a single square. So if we wanted to move our rook to where our king is, we couldn't do that because our king is already occupying that square. And of course, same with the black pieces. King moves. If the king wanted to move to where the rook is, he can't because obviously his rook is occupying that square. And here I'd like to illustrate what happens during a capture. So let's say my rook moves here, and as you can see, our rook can move to the square that our enemy rook is on. So black, if it's black's turn to move, he can go ahead and capture that rook. And the way capturing works is you move into the square that the enemy piece is occupying, and you capture it. And so if it's white's turn now, he can capture the rook, as you can see. He can recapture, as we say. And now there's just kings on the board. And so notice how we can only capture our opponent's pieces. We can't capture our own pieces in chess because it's kind of counterintuitive. You're killing your own army, you could say. So we don't capture our own pieces in chess, and this is actually a very important thing, as you'll see later. And one other thing to note is that our rook cannot go beyond our opponent's piece. We can go up to him and capture him, but we can't go anywhere beyond his piece because the piece is obstructing the rook's vision of the squares below it. So we can't go past our own pieces or our opponent's pieces in chess. Okay, so the next piece I'd like to introduce to you are the bishops. And the bishops are like the rooks in that they can go long distances, and unlike the kings, because the kings can only go one square at a time. But the bishops, they move along the diagonals. So the way you remember how a bishop moves is his head is pointy, and so if you take the point and extend it, it makes an X. So the bishops move in a big X, kind of like this. And notice how these two bishops, uh, each bishop will stay on the same colored square as it started. So this bishop started on a dark square, and this bishop started on a light square. So what that means is, if they only move on the diagonals, it's impossible for the bishops to capture each other. Okay, so the next piece I'm going to show you is the queen. The only thing you need to know about the queen is if a rook and bishop just collided and combined themselves into one piece, it would be the queen. So in other words, the queen's movements are just like that of the rook and bishop combined. As you can see, this queen can go anywhere to left or right, up or down, and she can also go on the diagonals. Same with this queen. And queen goes here, king gets out of the way, he doesn't want to be captured. Queen goes here, queen goes there, queen goes here, queen captures, and king captures. And that's how the queen moves. Okay, so the next piece I'd like to show you is the knight. And the knight's movements are tricky because all the other pieces, they move in a linear fashion, but the knight is special because he goes 2 squares in one direction and 1 square perpendicular to him. And when he's in the center, he has 8 different squares to go. Same with this knight. So what's nice about the knight is that whatever pieces are next to him, he can just simply jump over them. So this white knight can just jump over this black knight. He doesn't care if it's there. And this black knight can jump over this white knight. And essentially it's like he teleports there. None of the other pieces have this property where they can just jump from square to square and just avoid pieces. So the rooks cannot go past another piece to get to the square they want, and neither can the bishops or queens. But the knights can. They can jump over any piece that's in the vicinity, and it's essentially like they teleport there. One other thing to note about the knight is that if he starts on a dark square, he's going to move to a light square, and if he's on a light square, he's going to move to a dark square. See, now that he's on a light square, he moves to a dark square. He's always moving the same distance, which would be 2 square lengths up, 1 square length to the side, and that would be the square root of 5 square lengths that he moves every single move. And the last piece I have to show you are the pawns. And the pawns are kind of special in a way because they are the only piece that do not move the same as they capture. All the pieces I've shown you so far, they move to a square, they capture a piece, they move in the same way. Well, the pawns are kind of different, and here I'll explain why. So a pawn can go forward 1 square, that's his standard movement. And he's going to go forward 1 square. They're kind of like the foot soldiers of chess, so you just tell them to forward march and they just never go back. They only go forward. And they can go forward as long as there isn't something blocking them. So you would think that this pawn would be able to capture the enemy pawn, but in reality he can't. This is because pawns capture differently than they move. So the only way to get this pawn a little bit more forward would be to capture this pawn somehow, or just remove him somehow. So white could play something like this, and the capture, and the pawn goes 1 square forward. Oh, and if you noticed, I just moved this pawn forward twice. This is another exception to pawns. So the only time a pawn can move forward 2 squares is if the pawn starts on the second rank. So in chess we have ranks, which are horizontal lines of the chessboard, and we have files, which are vertical. And so unlike the rest of the pieces, the pawns start 1 rank ahead of the other pieces. So all pawns start on the 2nd rank, and for black they start on the 7th rank, and they move down. So the pawns move in opposite directions each other. White's pawns are going this way, up the board, black's pawns are going down the board. And so only on a pawn's first move, when it starts on the 2nd rank, can it move 2 squares and go up to the 4th rank. And for black, it would be from the 7th to the 5th. And just like this, before I did a capture here, and what I did was I moved my pawn forward, and now this pawn, he can actually move now because there's something for him to capture. And this is another point. So pawns, they move forward as long as there's nothing in the way, and only when there's something diagonal to them, one square only, pawns only move one square at a time, can they capture. So this pawn can capture this pawn, or he can move forward. So let's capture this pawn, and this pawn can capture back. Oh, and there's another special case here. Okay, so when a pawn reaches the end of the edge of the board, as a pawn, he wouldn't be able to move anymore because he's stuck on the backboard. But there's a special rule in chess, and this is very important. When a pawn reaches the opponent's home square, he can become any piece he wants to. He can become a bishop, knight, rook, or queen. And usually 98% of the time you want a queen because the queen is the most powerful piece. So that's a special property of pawns, and this is how a lot of games are decided. Alright, thank you guys so much for watching my video. Don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe if you liked the video, and I'll see you next time.